our flaming chalice, or at least the symbol of a flaming chalice. Hoping that it will inspire enlightenment. And there we are. So this morning, we will be reading poems of resistance, protest, and perhaps engagement. And we have with us Professor Ann Keniston, and we have a great many poems. So I'll refer you to the announcement, which has the details of Ann's biography, and she is professor of English at UNR, and has curated this wonderful array of poems that we're going to read alternately. Now, usually we have a brief reading to start a Sunday forum, and we're going to make it briefer than usual, namely the epigraph at the top of the page there, which is a quote from W.H. Auden's poem, September 1st, 1939. You'll remember that was the date that Hitler invaded Poland, and so you can imagine what was on his mind. And the quote is, "All I have is a voice to undo the folded lie." And you'll remember the many lies that led up to that invasion. And of course, it was all the Poles' fault, right? So I'm going to begin with the first poem, which Anne has assigned to me. So I just wanted to clear I wasn't being too obtrusive by going first. And this is a poem by Hadi Madhubuti. He is the founder and publisher of the Third World Press in Chicago. I think in 1965, he was one of the leaders of the Black Arts movement at the time, which included Gwendolyn Phillips and Maya Angelou and Amiri Baraka and other names you would know. Nikki Giovanni was another, and so on. And this is called Consideration of Poets, or For the Consideration of Poets. Where is the poetry of resistance, the poetry of honorable defiance, unafraid of lies from career politicians and businessmen, not respectful of journalists who write, officials speak, void of educated thought, without double search or subsurface questions that war talk demands? Where is the poetry of doubt and suspicion, not in the service of the state, bishops and priests, nor in the service of beautiful people and late night promises, not in the service of influence, incompetence, and academic clown talk? So we hope that the poems that will follow will be an answer to his question. And
Exactly.
your turn.
So this next poem is by Adrienne Rich, who she wrote this poem in 1991 and published it in a book of poems that were quite political. A lot of them were about the Intifada, which we dimly recall as the time of resistance of the Palestinians against the Israelis way back before all the current stuff happened. She is a poet who sort of started out as a very kind of obedient formalist poet. She's in a generation of poets who started out writing formal verse and then kind of broke with that, came out as a lesbian, and started writing much more political, kind of open-ended poems. So this is What Kind of Times Are These? There's a place between two stands of trees where the grass grows uphill and the old revolutionary road breaks off into shadows near a meeting house abandoned by the persecuted who disappear into those shadows. I've walked there picking mushrooms at the edge of dread, but don't be fooled. This isn't a Russian poem. This is not somewhere else but here, our country moving closer to its own truth and dread, its own ways of making people disappear. I won't tell you where the place is, the dark mesh of the woods meeting at the unmarked strip of light. Ghost-ridden crossroads, leaf-mold paradise. I already know who wants to buy it, sell it, make it disappear. And I won't tell you where it is. So why do I tell you anything? Because you still listen. Because in times like these, because in times like these, to have you listen at all, it's necessary to talk about the trees. And this poem I can't resist saying, it's interesting that she is using a little bit of rhyme or repetition. So shadows, shadows here disappear. So there's still a little bit of hint, leaves and trees, right? So it's a poem that is not a old-fashioned formal poem, but she's still using some formal elements here.
Well, the next poem is by Herman Melville, and I just remind you that although not very observant, Melville was a Unitarian and hobnobbed with other Unitarians and transcendentalists in the mid-19th century. All of whom I think were very moved by the horrors of the Civil War. This was written in April 1862, right after the Battle of Shiloh. It was a battle in Tennessee in which Union troops were ambushed by a superior force of Confederate troops, but won the battle nonetheless at great cost of human life. I would just point out also that Shiloh was the place in what is now the West Bank, where the original Israelite capital was, and where the Ark of the Covenant was, and so forth. But by the time of the prophets, and Jeremiah in particular, Shiloh was destroyed. There are archaeologic ruins now being excavated there, but Jeremiah used it as an example of what could happen to Jerusalem itself if the people of Israel did not follow God's expectations of them. That perhaps is something to think about today. Shiloh, a requiem. Skimming lightly, wheeling still, the swallows fly low over the field in clouded days, the forest field of Shiloh. Over the field where April rain solaced the parched ones stretched in pain, through the pause of night that followed the Sunday fight around the church of Shiloh. The church so lone, the log-built one, but echoed to many a parting groan, a natural prayer of dying foemen mingled there. Foemen at morn, but friends at eve, fame or country least their care, what like a bullet can undeceive. But now they lie low, while over them the swallows skim, and all is hushed at Shiloh.
I mean, it's an odd juxtaposition, but both Rich and Melville are sort of like telling the horror by telling it slant, as Dickinson says, by focusing on the swallows or focusing on the trees as a way to depict, but also evade the horror.
And contrast it.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Yeah. So this next poem is quite different. Gwendolyn Brooks was a poet, as Kevin mentioned, in the Black Arts Movement, in Chicago. And she experimented with all kinds of voices and forms throughout her long career. But this is a poem that is not narrated by the poet, it's narrated by someone else. A song in the front yard. I've stayed in the front yard all my life. I want to peek at the back, where it's rough and untended and hungry weed grows. A girl gets sick of the rose. I want to go in the backyard now and maybe down the alley to where the charity children play. I want a good time today. They do some wonderful things. They have some wonderful fun. My mother sneers, but I say it's fine, how they don't have to go in at 8:45. My mother, she tells me that Johnny May will grow up to be a bad woman, that George will be taken to jail sooner or late on account of last winter he sold our back gate. But I say it's fine, honest I do, and I'd like to be a bad woman too, and wear the brave stockings of night black lace and strut down the streets with paint on my face. So a very simple poem in a way, but quite complicated in terms of what it's saying about class, possibly race. Yeah.
Well, our next poem is by William Stafford. Stafford was born in Kansas, grew up in a tidy, small town in southwestern Kansas called Liberal. I think that.
I'm sorry, did you say liberal?
Liberal, Kansas. I think he was the only liberal ever to graduate from Liberal High School. In fact, he was a conscientious objector during World War II and spent the war working in public service camps in California and Arkansas. He was our poet laureate in 1970 at a time when it was called the consultant in poetry to the Library of Congress, but what is now the poet laureate. He spent most of his career teaching at Lewis and Clark in Oregon. He published some 57 volumes of poetry. He wrote 22,000 poems, of which 3,000 were were published. This is called At the Unnational Monument Along the Canadian Border. This is the field where the battle did not happen, where the unknown soldier did not die. This is the field where grass joined hands, where no monument stands, and the only heroic thing is the sky. Birds fly here without any sound, unfolding their wings across the open. No people killed or were killed on this ground, hallowed by neglect and an air so tame that people celebrated by forgetting its name.
We should have more of such.
So again, looking to the natural world for the contrast to our killing and our wars.
And I love the way this poem kind of interacts and speaks to the Rich poem, which is also about this sort of seemingly neglected area in the woods where something terrible did happen. But yeah, this kind of like definition through negation. So this next poem is by Philip Levine, who is a poet who recently, he's not still alive, is he? I don't think so. He's quite old if he's still
Yes,
alive.
I think you're right.
But he he was from Detroit and he worked there in the car auto factories, etc. And he was there in 1967 when there was a big uprising in Detroit. And this poem is his attempt to write about it. It has this strange title and refrain, They Feed, They Lion. And he said that he was working in a machine shop and an African-American guy, who's white, African-American guy said was making a joke and said something that included that phrase, they feed, they lion, and he said, and Philip Levine said, wow, you really have a way with words, and the guy was like, yeah, I knew you would notice that. Because he was a poet. So this poem is kind of it's sort of like a rant and a incantatory poem with a lot of repetition.
Excuse me, what was you said uproar or
Oh, the uprising,
uprising, what was it about?
it was a big, I mean, what at the time was called a riot, so in the mid-60s.
Reference, those
It was the
the
famous.
same interracial problems that were so common at the time?
Right, so this was a period when there was a lot of unrest in US cities.
Okay, that
Yeah,
gives me a little more background,
Okay.
because this is not making a lot of sense.
no, it doesn't. It's a poem that is really using language in a kind of nonlinear way, but I think it's pretty powerful.
Wandering.
So, okay, here we go. They feed, they lion. Out of burlap sacks, out of bearing butter, out of black bean and wet slate bread, out of the acids of rage, the candor of tar, out of creosote, gasoline, drive shafts, wooden dollies, they lie and grow. Out of the gray hills, out of industrial barns, out of rain, out of bus ride, West Virginia to kiss my ass, out of buried aunties, mothers hardening like pounded stumps, out of the bones need to sharpen and the muscles to stretch, they lie and grow. Earth is eating trees, fence posts, gutted cars. Earth is calling in her little ones, come home, come home. From pig balls, from the ferocity of pig driven to holiness, from the furred ear and the full jowl come the repose of the hung belly, from the purpose they lie and grow. From the sweet glues of the trotters come the sweet kinks of the fist, from the full flower of the hams, the thorax of caves, from bow down, from rise up, come they lion from the reeds of shovels, the grained arm that pulls the hands, they lie and grow. From my 5 arms and all my hands, from all my white sins forgiven, they feed. From my car passing under the stars, they lion. From my children inherit. From the oak turned to a wall, they lion. From they sack and they belly opened, and all that was hidden burning on the oil-stained earth, they feed their lion, and he comes. So a poem, I mean, this is not a very literal poem, but it's a poem, I think, about the kind of rising of power and resistance. That's how I read it.
Yeah, pain and violence.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The next poem is by Ilya Kaminsky. He's originally Ukrainian, immigrated with his family to the US, I think when he was 4 years old, from Odessa. Which was not long after he lost his hearing to an episode of mumps. He took his bachelor's degree in political science at Georgetown and his law degree at Hastings at UC in San Francisco. He co-founded the Poets for Peace and has won the T.S. Eliot Prize, a Guggenheim Fellowship. He's had the Ruth Lilly Fellowship from the Poetry Foundation and numerous other awards. Although he's practiced law and with particular attention to immigration law, I think. But he's also a professor of creative writing at Princeton. He speaks some 20 languages, but he's not going to visit any of them on us except English in this poem. We lived happily during the war. And when they bombed other people's houses, we protested. but not enough. We opposed them, but not enough. I was in my bed, around my bed, America was falling. Invisible house by invisible house by invisible house. I took a chair outside and watched the sun. In the 6th month of a disastrous reign in the house of money, in the street of money, in the city of money, in the country of money, our great country of money, we, forgive us, lived happily during it.
This next poet, Lucille Clifton, is a poet who maybe was slightly neglected during her lifetime, but she died, I think, in around 2008, maybe, maybe a little later. But she is getting much more attention now, and there's biographies and celebrations. She grew up in Buffalo. And she wrote these very short poems using lowercase letters. And she said she wrote them, this kind of poem, because she had children and she had to grab time when she could, when they were napping. And, all she could write was a short poem. And yet her poems contain so much in them.
Yeah, Emily Dickinson didn't have that excuse.
Right, well, have you seen a writing table?
And she went her own act, right?
Right, that's true, very true. Yeah, well, she used very little pieces of paper to write, so maybe that was the key for her. And on a very teeny, I mean, it was like, her desk was like what we would call a bedside table. I mean, it was like this big, you could see it if you visit her house. Yeah, and Clifton's poems are kind of deceptively simple often. So here is, won't you celebrate with me? Won't you celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of life? I had no model, born in Babylon, both non-white and woman. What did I see to be except myself? I made it up here on this bridge between starshine and clay, my one hand holding tight my other hand. Come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me. That's failed.
Explain the literary reference of Babylon.
Yeah, I know,
There's
it's,
2 songs in a row by Brandy Carlisle last night, I didn't know.
yeah, well, it's really, I mean, it's a weird moment in the poem. Because it seems like it's quite literal, and yet by saying born in Babylon, she's transporting herself with that one word, right? Both non-white and woman seems literal, but Babylon is this biblical reference to exile, maybe. And a kind of a lineage through time. And then I think that's also, I mean, there's something similar maybe going on with here on this bridge, again, like here, right here, between starshine and clay. It's like all of a sudden the poem kind of leaps into this place of mystery. And what does that mean between starshine and clay? Between, you know, the huge heaven and the ordinary earth, between what's non-physical and what's physical, between eternity and mortality. So there's so much in that. And while I'm talking about the poem, I think another thing that's really interesting is that it starts out by asking this question, won't you celebrate with me? And by the end, it's a command, come celebrate with me. And the thing that is being celebrated is much more kind of pointed, that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed. And we don't know what that something is. It's different every day, maybe. So this is really a poem of, I think so many of these poems are poems of such ambivalence, but here's a poem that's saying, we need to celebrate having evaded, these terrible things that are seeking our destruction. And that should be a cause for celebration.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, and our need to find that bridge between the spiritual and the material,
Mhm.
between the starlight and
Yeah, and one hand holding tight, the other hand is such a precise. For me, very beautiful image. It's not one hand holding you, it's my hands are holding each other because I have myself. Is this invitation to us, the readers, to join in that celebration.
and how often do we do that when so much is at stake,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Well, the next poem is by Denise Levertov. A very interesting poet. She was born to a Russian Jew who moved to England and became an Anglican priest. And she was essentially homeschooled in a house full of books and a family that read to each other. So a very different kind of background. But in spite of the lack of degrees, she ultimately taught at MIT and Tufts and Brandeis and especially Stanford, I think. She was a Guggenheim Fellow. She won the Robert Frost Medal and wrote some 24 books of poetry. So this is one of them. Making Peace. A voice from the dark called out, the poets must give us imagination of peace to oust the intense, familiar imagination of disaster. Peace, not only the absence of war, but peace, like a poem, is not there ahead of itself, can't be imagined before it is made, can't be known except in the words of its making, grammar of justice, syntax of mutual aid, a feeling towards it, dimly sensing a rhythm is all we have until we begin to utter its metaphors, learning them as we speak. A line of peace might appear if we reconstructed the sentence our lives are making, revoked its reaffirmation of profit and power, questioned our needs, allowed long pauses. A cadence of peace might balance its weight on that different fulcrum, peace, a presence, an energy field more intense than war, might pulse then, stanza by stanza, into the world, each act of living, one of its words, each word, a vibration of light, facets of the forming crystal.
One thing so many of these poems do, one thing so many of these poems do is talk about like what is the purpose of poetry. I was just at a National Poetry Month reading down in Midtown last week. And that was something that all the poets who read talked about, like what is the point of poetry in a time like this? What can poetry do? Why should people read poetry? Why should people write poetry? So I think that is a question that comes up a lot during times of crisis. Yeah.
And isn't poetry all the more important?
Well, that's what we poets like to.
If you can get people to read.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So this poem is a little bit different. It's really a poem. I love this poem and I wanted to include it, even though it's not quite as directly political as some of the others. But I actually, a couple of weeks ago, took this free workshop that this organization called Poets House put on, called Poetry of Resilience, I think it was, Resistance and Resilience. And this was one of the poems that was introduced there. And it's a poem that I had read, but had sort of forgotten about. So Ocean Vuong is a relatively young poet, the child of Vietnamese refugees. As a matter of fact, he was not born in the US himself. He's written 2 books of poetry and 1 novel, which is quite memoiristic. That's sort of an address to his mother. And interestingly, the title of that book, On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, is also the title of one of his poems. So there's this really interesting interaction between his identity as a poet and as a fiction writer. And he does have a new novel coming out, which is cause for great excitement for many people, including me. So I jumped onto the library website and put my name down for, so I'm first in line for it. He did win a MacArthur after the novel came out. So after with 1 book of poetry and 1 novel, I think people thought his work was so innovative and powerful that he was granted a MacArthur. So this is from his first book. And it's a poem in which, as you'll see, he talks to himself. Someday I'll love Ocean Vuong. Ocean, don't be afraid. The end of the road is so far ahead, it is already behind us. Don't worry. Your father is only your father until one of you forgets. Like how the spine won't remember its wings, no matter how many times our knees kiss the pavement. Ocean, are you listening? The most beautiful part of your body is wherever your mother's shadow falls. Here's the house with childhood whittled down to a single red tripwire. Don't worry, just call it horizon and you'll never reach it. Here's today. Jump. I promise it's not a lifeboat. Here's the man whose arms are wide enough to gather your leaving. And here the moment, just after the lights go out, when you can still see the faint torch between his legs. How you use it again and again to find your own hands. You asked for a second chance and are given a mouth to empty out of. Don't be afraid. The gunfire is only the sound of people trying to live a little longer and failing. Ocean, ocean, get up. The most beautiful part of your body is where it's headed. And remember, loneliness is still time spent with the world. Here's the room with everyone in it. Your dead friends passing through you like wind through a wind chime. Here's a desk with the gimp leg and a brick to make it last. Yes, here's a room so warm and blood close. I swear you will wake and mistake these walls for skin. So, again, another poem that's not very linear, that has all sorts of images and it goes all over the place, but I find it so beautiful. And if this were another kind of a forum and we were gonna do a writing exercise, I think this would be a wonderful one, is to write a letter to yourself and to tell yourself whatever it is, remembering things, looking towards the future, thinking about your relationship with other people, with your parents. So, yeah. So definitely a poem of resilience in the face of difficulty, as so many of these poems are.
Yeah, I think, well, of course, he's Vietnamese, and we'll have a later poem that references Vietnam as well. If I remember the story correctly, his mother, after they emigrated, worked in a beauty parlor in
Right,
New
a nail
York.
salon, yeah.
And at the time, one of her she was trying to describe a visit to the beach to one of her customers and couldn't think of a word. to describe the sea, and the customer came up with ocean.
Yes.
And she thought, oh, that's such a lovely word.
Yes, yes,
So she named her son Ocean.
right, right. And the novel is actually, as I say, I'm teaching a class where it's about the ways that fiction and autobiography merge. And this is written as a novel, but it is about, what seems to be his mother and his grandmother. And the ways that they, suffer from, essentially PTSD based on, the war and also other, traumatic events. And it depicts himself as especially a high schooler, sort of trying to figure out a way to make sense of that and get away from it. And yet he reenacts some of that trauma, and I really recommend it. As well as his poems, of course.
The next poem is by Danez Smith, not an elegy for Mike Brown. So it's clear what this is about. Danez Smith was born in St. Paul. I need to be sure to get my pronouns correct. But this is from their book, Don't Call Us Dead, which won the National Book Award. Danez Smith was also a Ruth Lilly Fellow, and won the Pushcart Prize. They are co-host of a podcast from the Poetry Foundation. They received their degrees at the University of Wisconsin and an MFA from the University of Michigan. They've won the Four Quartets Prize from the Poetry Foundation, and the Forward Prize, which is a British prize, which usually is awarded to books published in the UK. And currently they teach in the MFA program at Randolph College in Minnesota. So they remain based in the Twin Cities. I am sick of writing this poem, but bring the boy, his new name, his same old body, ordinary, black, dead thing. Bring him, and we will mourn until we forget what we are mourning. And isn't that what being black is about? Not the joy of it, but the feeling you get when you were looking at your child, turn your head, then poof, no more child. That feeling, that's black. Think once a white girl was kidnapped, and that's the Trojan War. Later, up the block, Troy got shot, and that was Tuesday. Are we not worthy of a city of ash, of 1,000 ships launched because we are missed? So the striking contrast between a kidnapped white girl and a kidnapped black girl, a black death and a white death. Yeah.
There's more to the poem.
Oh, really? Oh, am I? Oh, you oh dear. Oh. How did I do that? Okay.
So
It was a good ending though.
Yeah. So we're.
Yes, I see. Oh, thank you. Always something deserves to be burned. It's never the right thing nowadays. I demand a war to bring the dead boy back, no matter what his name is this time. I, at least, demand a song. A song will do just fine. Look at what the Lord has made above Missouri, sweet smoke.
It's interesting that Danez Smith, who actually came to Reno a while ago up to the university, got their start as a spoken word poet. So, you know, sort of poets who perform in bars and their competitions and stuff, and you can hear a little bit of that. And if you look on YouTube at recordings of readings, they're very kind of performative and quite a pleasure to listen to.
Yeah, they've certainly won several major poetry slams.
Right. So, yeah, there used to be this kind of split in poetry between the spoken word slam poets and the poetry for the page. And Danez Smith is one of the several poets who kind of broken down that barrier. Patricia Smith is another one.
I'm old enough to remember the one they were called beatniks.
Right, well, that's sort of similar, although, yeah, those were also like written for the for performance, but were also published, right, often by City Lights Press, yeah.
It's amazing the echoes.
Yeah, right. And that, I mean, not to get all nerdy, but that tradition of that kind of rant, like the Philip Levine poem, with all the repetition that you see in Ginsberg, that you see in Danez Smith, that actually goes back to Walt Whitman, who was another political poet who wrote during and about the Civil War. And one of the poems we didn't include was a poem about, you know, war is going on and yet people are going about their business. And sort of in the background, there are all these explosions of the battle. So he was really a kind of forefather for a lot of contemporary poets. And
It's okay to be a nerd. I find living being.
oh, good, okay, thank you. So this poem, we're gonna each read a poem of our own, but this seemed like kind of a nice bookend to the first poem that we read, because it really is about poetry and what poetry can do in times of crisis. So Juan Felipe Herrera was also a poet laureate, and I believe he wrote this when he was poet laureate. And this is about, as the epigraph says, those killed at the church shooting in Charleston in 2015. Poem by poem, in memory of Cynthia Hurd, Susie Jackson, Ethel Lance, Reverend DePayne Middleton, Doctor, Honorable Reverend Clementa Pinckney, Tywanza Sanders, Reverend Daniel Simmons Sr., Reverend Sharonda Singleton, Myra Thompson, shot and killed while at church, Charleston, South Carolina, June 18th, 2015. Rest in peace.
Welcoming the shooter into their group.
Can I ask a question before you?
Yeah.
And this is the autistic part of me. Why the odd spacing?
That's something that some poets do. And
Why? Yeah, but what-
well, I think there are a number of ways to explain it. One is that it's sort of a pause in the line that's not quite, when in poetry, it's written in lines for the most part, and there's a pause at the end of the line.
All right,
And so a pause within the line is maybe a little bit less than the pause at the end of the line, but it's still a pause. And actually Adrian Rich,
they're huge pauses.
yes, right.
I mean, it's what,
but-
15, 20 characters?
Yeah. And so sometimes it's sort of like a drop down line, that is the line.
I'm sorry, drop down.
A
line.
drop down, meaning the line sort of, one line kind of continues on the next line. These are, so there's like a indent that's equivalent to the, it's hard to explain.
Okay.
But,
I'm sorry, my
yeah.
career was in computers, so I'm trying to.
oh, yeah, but it's one of the things that poets do, and especially maybe contemporary poets, is kind of play around with the left margin. So one of the definitions of poetry is that, you know, it's really hard to define, but one way to define it is that it has a ragged right margin. But poets are also playing around with the left margin a little bit. So it's almost like, in some cases, maybe like a paragraph indent, but also a pause within the line. So I don't know that there's any singular reason that poets do it, except that they it's one of the ways that.
Like to confuse logical people.
Right, I mean, that poetry is about spacing as well as sound.
So, you know, this is why I told you in high school, I was told I could never write a poem.
But it's easy to play around with, I mean, it's fun, you know, and there are poets who write poems that sort of float all over the page. You know, I mean, it's especially easy to do it with a computer, because just keep pushing tab, right? What were you gonna say?
Well, yeah, I mean, even though poetry is, I think, meant in general to be heard, to be read aloud, like we're doing this morning. There's also a visual component, you know, the way it looks on the page, which is why we're trying to show it to you as we, as we read it. But I think, we create pauses with punctuation in prose, right? Commas, semicolons, periods, and exclamation marks and so forth. So this is a different way of creating that pause, and what the pause does is to make you stop and think for a moment about what you just heard, that last word or that last phrase before you go on.
So when you read this, then, do you introduce that pause?
Well, I think there are different ways to read. I mean, some people read right.
You're about to find out.
Right.
if you read
Some people, I mean, it's definitely,
Whether aloud or in your mind.
well, I
I
think.
don't know about
reading
you,
it-
but I always hear it in my little narrator.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, but.
And I mean,
The
I think,
rules, what are
right.
the rules
Well,
of this?
the
A
rule- I mean, I
comma
think
is
it's-
a little pause, a period is a big pause.
right, well, I think it's subjective, and this is a poem that has no punctuation except for the em dash. Between back and blow, or there's another one too. But so using the spacing is a way to indicate pauses, and, you know, one thing to listen to is like, is this poem a single sentence or is it multiple sentences, right? There are no sentence breaks, but so sometimes that's something else that poets do through line break or capitalization is, for example, poem by poem, we can end the violence every day. Is every day go with the violence or does it go with every day after, right? It's ambiguous because there's no punctuation. So we can read it in multiple ways. And
This
that's,
is a choice,
it's just
so
a,
that it can be read multiple ways?
I think it can be read
Is this what
multiple
it's-
ways, but
Is
it's,
this a choice of the author for that?
yeah, and that one of the
Okay, that
things
makes
that
sense.
unpunctuated poems do, and even line breaks, is that they sometimes, there's like a double meaning, right? So let me read it and then we can see how it sounds and how you think, what you think of my reading.
I'm sorry.
No, and then but I mean, I think there are multiple ways of reading it and people read their own poems differently, people read other people's poems differently. Some people pause at the line break, some people pause a lot, some people don't pause. So let me give it a try.
Now the pressure's really on.
I know.
Now that you're self-conscious.
Yes,
about the pause.
exactly. Poem by poem, we can end the violence every day after every other day. 9 killed in Charleston, South Carolina. They are not 9, they are each one alive. We do not know you have a poem to offer. It is made of action. You must search for it, run outside and give your life to it. When you find it, walk it back, blow upon it, carry it taller than the city where you live. When the blood comes down, do not ask if it is your blood. It is made of 9 drops. Honor them, wash them, stop them from falling. So I could read it in 5 minutes totally differently. And even you could read it differently, but you know, I think you want to honor the pauses. And one thing that is sometimes said about poetry is that, you know, back before the typewriter was invented or used widely, poetry really was written for the ear. And back in the 19th century and earlier and, you know, time of Homer, poetry was recited and it was really written to be heard. But that one change that came about around the time of the, 20th century was that poetry started being written for the page. So think of like E. E. Cummings,
Mhm.
with all those weird little line breaks and the ampersand that is, those poems could not have been handwritten. They were written for the eye. And they have all those weird line breaks and things like that. So I think there's a tension, some people say, between what the eye, poetry written for the eye and poetry written for the ear. And we mostly read poems silently in books, and yet, as you say, we recite them to ourselves. So it's both.
Well,
Now, okay, now we're near the end.
yes, so we might have time for a bonus poem or two. So we'll see. When I was a medical student at UCLA, a group of physicians led by a professor of pediatrics, Leonard Lindy, and Physicians for Responsibility were airlifting injured children from the war, Vietnam, to UCLA for medical care and surgical care. This poem is inspired by one of those children. Pardon me, I need to clear the lump in my throat. And it's called That Child. That child, with this forever darkest tear in her blind eye, may forget your loving voice and nursing hand, but not the rattle of helicopters that murder her father again every night. She remembers how they found him the next morning in the river, staring through death as if surprised at his gnarled hand. Take her home with you and say, as if surprised, they never do that here. They never do it here. You kiss her with lips as wet and lethal as the unremembering river, her eyes forgiving as poppies search the caves where sleep meanders.
Yes. Just the understatement of your poem,
What's that?
the understatement of your poem.
Oh.
So powerful. So I have, during the fall, was writing a bunch of poems, all of which were called autumnal. And they were just really kind of daily poems almost. The poems where I was playing around with not using punctuation and kind of, just putting things into poems that I'd never put into poems. So this poem is about my visit to the dental hygienist, and it's called Autumnal. I was the last appointment of the day, which I guess gave the hygienist license to let loose. Tools in my mouth, she started in on the election. Then trans rights, everything she said was misinformation. She must have heard first on Fox News. My mouth was full of equipment, mostly sharp, but I kept interrupting, trying to speak the facts. I don't know why I thought she might believe me, but I kept talking as if we actually agreed. She said she had no faith in anyone in politics, but one of her coworkers had just visited a psychic who was sure Biden wouldn't serve out his full term and Trump would be dead within 2 years. Then she said she really liked Pete Buttigieg, which was finally something I could agree with. That's when our conversation started feeling intimate, a diversion, improv act, or giddy game. At the door, we agreed to see at my next cleaning whether the psychic's predictions were wrong or right. I almost hugged her as we said goodbye, then walked out into the early November night.
So you're gonna have another appointment for 2 years?
Well, I don't know if you guys have, I definitely have had other experiences with the same dental hygienist where I felt that I couldn't speak. And my husband goes to the same one, he's like, I can't, she's gonna stab me. But
You're a little vulnerable. and you're
Yeah, exactly, but on the other hand,
Captive audience.
you know, how you're supposed to like, you know, make your argument wherever you can without alienating the other person, so.
You know, my dentist always quizzes me about infectious diseases.
Oh, yes, getting some free medical advice.
What tools do you want?
Well,
Let's end with Maya Angelou.
what's that?
Let's end with Maya Angelou.
Okay, all right. Let's make sure I
Yeah.
get to the end of the poem. I'm checking. All right, so this is Still I Rise. Maya Angelou, I think, requires no introduction, but you can see it's an early poem. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I'll rise. Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? Because I walk like I've got oil wells pumping in my living room, just like moons and like suns with the certainty of tides, just like hope springing high, still I'll rise. Did you want to see me broken? Bowed head and lowered eyes, shoulders falling down like teardrops, weakened by my soulful cries. Does my haughtiness offend you? Don't you take it awful hard, cause I laugh like I've got gold mines digging in my own backyard. You may shoot me with your words, you may cut me with your eyes, you may kill me with your hatefulness, but still, like air, I'll rise. Does my sexiness upset you? Does it come as a surprise? Do I dance like I've got diamonds at the meeting of my thighs? Out of the huts of history's shame I rise. Up from a past that's rooted in pain I rise. I'm a black ocean, leaping and wide, welling and swelling I bear in the tide. Leaving behind nights of terror and fear I rise. Into a daybreak that's wondrously clear, I rise, bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave. I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I rise, I rise, I rise. We have time for the last bonus poem.
Oh, okay. Should I read it?
Well, it's your turn.
Okay.
All right. I love this poem.
So Harriet Malin is a poet who's written in all different kinds of forms. She wrote a bunch of tanka poems, if I'm remembering right. Poems that are in the Japanese form. She's often written poems that are very punny, use lots of wordplay, etc. This is a more straightforward poem. We are not responsible. We are not responsible. Sorry. We are not responsible for your lost or stolen relatives. We cannot guarantee your safety if you disobey our instructions. We do not endorse the causes or claims of people begging for handouts. We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone. Your ticket does not guarantee that we will honor your reservations. In order to facilitate our procedures, please limit your carrying on. Before taking off, please extinguish all smoldering resentments. If you cannot understand English, you will be moved out of the way. In the event of a loss, you'd better look out for yourself. Your insurance was canceled because we can no longer handle your frightful claims. Our handlers lost your luggage and we are unable to find the key to your legal case. You were detained for interrogation because you fit the profile. You are not presumed to be innocent if the police have reason to suspect you are carrying a concealed wallet. It's not our fault you were born wearing a gang color. It is not our obligation to inform you of your rights. Step aside, please, while our officer inspects your bad attitude. You have no rights we are bound to respect. please remain calm, or we can't be held responsible for what happens to you.
2002.
Wow.
You think it was yesterday?
Right,
Yeah,
yeah, well, and that's
that's a
true.
powerful poem.
Yeah, that's kind of true of all these poems, I think. They're all newly relevant, unfortunately. Yeah,
Well,
Well.
with bonus poems, we're right
Yes.
on time.
excellent. Yeah.
Thank you very much,
Oh,
Ann.
thank you. It's so fun to do this with you.
Yes,
And thank you
yes.
guys for coming out early on Easter and foregoing your eggs Benedict or whatever.
Thank you for your kindness putting up with me.
Oh, well, thanks for your great questions.
Yeah, that's great.
Do you have time for a question?
Yeah, do we have questions from the Zoom group?
This is Leah. So far, the Zoom group was just discussing how to get a copy of the document with all the poems. So I put the link in the chat, but it doesn't work quite well. So we'll send it out as an attachment. But if anyone has questions on Zoom, you're welcome to unmute, or you can drop them in the chat and I can read them. Professor Kennison, fantastic way to spend an Easter morning. I actually called my grandma and read to her some of these poems because she
Oh,
and she's very excited about these poems for protest.
that's great.
Yeah, Gwendolyn Brooks. I know someone asked about how do you know how to read these poems, and I think Gwendolyn Brooks was one of those first poets that I was exposed to that really set that difference for me of poetry that's meant for the ear versus poetry that's meant
Yeah.
to be read. And so I highly recommend just reading Gwendolyn Brooks poetry out loud and listening to her read her poetry as that introduction to poetry for the ear.
That's a great recommendation. Yes,
Good.
and I love the idea of sharing these poems with other people. Please share widely. Yes.
Good.
Maybe there's a way to get an electronic version,
What's that?
to get an electronic version for people who are here today.
Well, all these poems are online, so you
Right.
can,
You can send them through.
yeah, so they're all on either the poets.org or poetry.org, which are the two main, and that's really a great resource if you're kind of curious about poetry. They both have a kind of poem a day thing you can subscribe to in your email and just get a poem every morning and read it. It's
Yeah.
just a really nice thing to do.
You can
Yeah.
also just image it with your phone and email.
That's my,
Oh,
yeah, I
that's
think
too.
one of my questions has been answered. Yeah, that's my, I would like to share this with some UU friends who are in other places in the country. I plan to just photograph it.
Yeah.
Because I think the collection flows, you can put together a really nice order of things.
Thanks.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, I will send the handout out to all of those on our email, Sunday Forum email list. So if there's anyone who is not on that list and wants to be, just let me know. My email's on Realm. You can find it there, but it's Kevin Murphy, MD @hotmail.com. If you can remember that. And
Many of us struggle with them.
if not, it's on Realm. So, and I will be sending it out. Good.
Yes.
Right.
Any other comments or questions?
The last, Dennis Smith,
Mm.
that the last two lines, baffle me. What do you think he's, what are they alluding to? Look at what the Lord has made above Missouri, sweet smoke on page 9.
Mm. It sounds like a prayer, right? I mean, a kind of marveling, and the kind of irony, almost like, strange fruit, right? Sweet smoke above Missouri. Yeah. So it kind of, almost like an ironic.
You can think of all the churches that got.
Yeah, he's already referred to St. Louis as a city of ash, right? So this is the sweet smoke above a city of ash.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And the way that smoke is, has that biblical, right? Because didn't God appear to Moses in a pillar of smoke or something?
Burning bush, right?
Oh, burning bush, okay. Yeah, but same idea.
But of course, remember the Greeks could not leave for Troy without a sacrifice,
Mhm.
right? A burning sacrifice. And the gods wanted to smell the smoke as it rose to to the heavens.
Right.
And otherwise, those 1,000 ships would not have been launched against Troy, right?
The horrible way Christians killed their heritage.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And it was Agamemnon's own daughter, right?
Right, exactly.
It was a real sacrifice,
Yeah.
leading to multiple tragedies.
Yes, many tragedies, all preserved for us.
Well, that's the thing is that going through this, as you were going through all the war things. My soul just started echoing across the centuries.
Yeah, exactly.
How many men, how many husbands have been put in my lap, dead or dying? Because they went off to fight, to war.
Yeah.
And, you know, and it's like, great, now what do I and the kids do? You
Right.
know, in the time when you couldn't go out and earn a living, now what?
Yeah.
For God and country, God, I hate that
Right.
term.
Well, there's a wonderful, Adrienne Rich has a memoir, a kind of a polemical, it's called Of Woman Born, about motherhood, kind of early feminist book that has some autobiography in it, but she was the mother of 3 sons. And someone said to her, "Oh, are you working for the army?" Because, yeah, which I just always remember that as the mother of 2 sons. Yeah, like that's what the army requires, is more and more sons, right?
And yet, the way humans are, we inevitably cycle back to where it's necessary. And we're in that cycle again. We're back in the 1930s Germany again. And someone died in the freaking camps. This is scaring the hell out of me.
Yeah. Well, on that sobering note,
I'm sorry,
so,
but thank you for being here and thank you for putting.
Oh, well, thank you. No, thank you so much
This-
for being
You know,
in this room.
With reading, you have the comma and you have the period, right? You have the everything else. With music, you have the different notes and you have the rest stops and it tells you how to vocalize
Mhm.
this. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, where are the rules?
Right. But that's, and then it can be really pleasurable for a poet.
The autistic part of me goes, wait a minute.
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, well, many poets are saying, figure it out.
Your choice.
Or choose your own adventure.
But then they
right.
tell you that you chose wrong.
Well, not
It's like-
necessarily, I think.
Yeah,
there's-
well, and you
Oh, I
can't
get
choose
that
wrong.
one.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah, you're not gonna be wrong.
I used to tick off my teachers. I remember one time especially I went up and I said, what do you mean by this phrase? What do you mean what I mean? What do you mean by this phrase? Because if it's saying this, then the answer is this. If you're saying this, then the answer is that. Just answer the question.
Yeah.
I got told.
Well, this light goes out, but not the light in our souls, right?
Mhm.